My fiancée, Emily, and I decided to take a much-needed break and visit Helsinki. We booked a charming little Airbnb apartment in the city, close to where some of my family lived. It seemed perfect, cozy, modern, and located in a quiet neighborhood. We were excited to explore the city and catch up with relatives we hadn't seen in years. As soon as we arrived, we were impressed by how clean and well-kept the apartment was. The owner had left a little welcome note and a small basket with local snacks, which was a nice touch. It felt like a warm and inviting place, the kind of apartment you'd want to stay in on vacation. But almost immediately, little things started feeling off. After unpacking, Emily and I started talking about the apartment's layout and what was missing. Emily pointed out that the bathroom only had one towel hook, which was strange since it was clearly meant for 2 guests. I remember saying, "I wish there was another towel hook in here," thinking it would make things a bit more convenient. We laughed it off, not thinking much of it, and continued our evening. The next day, we spent the entire day out. We visited some of Helsinki's best spots, enjoyed a nice lunch by the harbor, and caught up with my family. By the time we got back to the apartment, it was already dark. We were both exhausted and ready to wind down. Emily went to take a shower first, and I started unpacking some groceries we had picked up for the next day's breakfast. A few minutes later, Emily called me from the bathroom, her voice a mix of surprise and confusion. "Hey, come look at this," she said. I walked over, wondering what was going on. She pointed to the wall beside the sink. My heart skipped a beat. There was a second towel hook, exactly where we had talked about needing one the day before. I stared at it, my mind blown. "Did you call the owner or someone?" I asked Emily. She shook her head, looking just as puzzled as I was. Neither of us had said the missing hook to anyone. The door was always locked when we were out, and there were no signs of anyone having been inside while we were gone. I tried to explain it. Maybe the owner had overheard us talking and decided to be extra accommodating. But how could they possibly have known the exact spot where we wanted the hook? It didn't make sense. We shrugged it off and went to bed, convincing ourselves it was just a weird coincidence. But then things started getting even stranger. The next morning, I woke up early to make coffee. As I was standing in the kitchen, I noticed something small and shiny on the counter that hadn't been there the night before, a silver spoon. It wasn't ours, and it didn't match the set in the kitchen. I asked Emily about it, but she had no idea where it came from. It was as if someone had just placed it there overnight. We tried to ignore it, but that uneasy feeling stayed. That day, we decided to spend more time out, hoping to shake off the strange vibe. We got back later that evening, and the apartment felt different again. The air seemed heavier and colder, like someone had been there while we were away. We checked the locks. They were all secure, just as we had left them. Emily went to take another shower, and when she came out, she had that same confused look on her face. "Did you notice anything weird with the towels?" she asked. I walked over to see what she meant. One of the towels was now neatly folded and placed on the bed, even though we always left them hanging in the bathroom. It was unsettling, like someone had been inside, organizing things, watching our every move. I checked the apartment entirely, looking for any signs of a break-in, but everything seemed normal. That night, we couldn't sleep. Every little noise made us scared, the creaking of the floor, the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway. At one point, Emily woke me up, saying she heard whispering. I listened, but the apartment was silent. I told her it was just the wind, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. The next day, we couldn't take it anymore. We packed up our things, called the owner, and said there was an emergency at home, and we had to leave early. The owner was polite but seemed surprised, especially since we didn't give a clear reason. We just couldn't convey ourselves to say, "Hey, it feels like someone's been in our apartment, rearranging our stuff." We ended up checking into a hotel for the rest of our stay in Helsinki. It wasn't as good as the Airbnb, but at least we felt safe. A few days later, I got curious and decided to check the reviews of the place. Most were positive, but I found one that sent chills down my spine. It was a brief review, left by a couple who had stayed there a few months before us. They mentioned feeling uncomfortable, like someone was entering the apartment when they were out. They even mentioned strange things moving around and feeling like they were being watched. It was almost the exact experience we had. I don't know who or what was behind those creepy events, but I'm just glad we got out when we did. To this day, I can't explain how that towel hook appeared overnight, or why things kept moving around without us noticing. We haven't used Airbnb since, and every time I think about that apartment, I always wonder, was it really just a helpful owner, or was something far more sinister lurking behind those walls? Either way, it was an experience that still haunts us. I had just gone through a stressful few months at work, so when I found a quiet little cottage on Airbnb, it seemed like the perfect escape. The listing described it as a cozy, just outside a small town in Pennsylvania. The pictures showed a charming little house with a wraparound porch, an old rocking chair, and a view of a dense forest. The reviews were mostly positive, mentioning how peaceful and quiet the place was. But there was one review that stood out. It simply said, "Don't stay here alone." I brushed it off as someone trying to be dramatic. I arrived at the cottage late in the afternoon. It looked exactly like the pictures, but something felt off. Maybe it was the cloudy sky or the chill in the air, but the place just felt cold. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the smell of old wood and a faint hint of something else, something I couldn't describe. It was as if the air was heavy, like the house was holding its breath. As I walked through, I noticed little details that weren't in the photos. A dusty old mirror in the hallway, paintings of the forest that looked almost too real, and a grandfather clock that ticked loudly, breaking the silence every few seconds. The living room had an odd layout with an old couch, a fireplace that hadn't seen fire in years, and that rocking chair positioned perfectly in front of a large window facing the woods. It tilted slightly as if someone had just left it. The first night was uneventful. I lit a few candles, cooked dinner, and watched some TV. As I got ready for bed, I noticed that the rocking chair was moving again, just slightly. I thought it must be the wind from the window, or maybe the uneven floor. I closed the bedroom door, leaving it slightly open, and crawled into bed. I could hear the soft creak of the rocking chair in the silence, a rhythmic back and forth that almost felt satisfying. I must have fallen asleep at some point, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing. It wasn't mine. It was slow, deep, and seemed to echo throughout the room. I froze and tried to listen. The breathing continued, low and steady. I turned on my phone's flashlight and shined it around the room, but nothing was there. Just as I was about to think it was my imagination, I noticed something in the corner of the room, a faint shadow, like a figure crouching. I rushed and turned on the lights. The shadow was gone, but my heart was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I checked the whole cottage, but it was empty. When I went back to bed, I made sure to close the door completely this time. But as soon as I lay down, I heard it again. Slow, deliberate breathing, but this time it was closer, almost right next to me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it was just the stress of work and being alone in an unfamiliar place. But when I went to make coffee, I found something that made my blood run cold. On the kitchen table was an old photo, black and white, of a man and a woman standing in front of the cottage. The man was staring straight at the camera, his eyes cold and lifeless. But the woman, she was looking off to the side, her face twisted in terror. I flipped the photo over, and on the back, a text written in faded handwriting, "He never left." I threw the photo in the trash and decided I needed to get out of the house for a while. I drove into town and spent the day trying to clear my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I returned to the cottage that evening, I was greeted by the sound of that old rocking chair moving back and forth. I stopped and my heart started pounding. I walked slowly toward it, half expecting to see someone sitting there, but it was empty. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but every few minutes I'd hear a creak, like footsteps upstairs. I checked the whole house again, even opened every closet and checked under the bed, but there was no one. As I settled back on the couch, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The photo I had thrown away was back on the kitchen table, exactly where I had found it. Only this time, there was a new message on the back. I see you. Panic set in. I locked myself in the bedroom, not knowing what else to do. I called the Airbnb owner, hoping for some explanation, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message in my shaky voice, but I never got a response. That night, the noises got worse. Footsteps, whispers, and the constant sound of breathing, always just out of sight. I kept the lights on, sitting on the bed with my back against the wall, gripping my phone like it was a lifeline. Around 3 a.m., I heard the door creak open slowly. My breath hitched, and I pointed my flashlight toward the hallway. Nothing. But then, the closet door, the one I had checked 100 times, began to open, inch by inch. I could see the dark space inside, and then, just for a moment, I saw him. The man from the photo staring at me from the darkness, his eyes hollow and his mouth twisted into a smile. I screamed and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was in my car, driving away as fast as I could. I never went back to collect my things. I contacted Airbnb, but they couldn't reach the owner either. The listing was removed shortly after, and no matter how much I tried to find out who owned the cottage, I hit a dead end every time. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that slow, deliberate breathing. And I know, deep down, that he never really left. I was traveling for work and decided to book an Airbnb for a few nights instead of a hotel. I found this adorable Victorian-style house that had recently been renovated and was renting out a guest room. It was located in a quiet, old neighborhood on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts. The listing had good reviews, all praising the owner for being friendly and the house for its cozy, welcoming vibe. I booked it without a second thought. When I arrived, the owner, an elderly woman named Martha, greeted me with a warm smile. She showed me around the house, pointing out the kitchen, the living room, and finally my guest room upstairs. It was a lovely room, but I noticed the heavy, dark curtains that blocked most of the light from the window. There was also a large antique wardrobe that covered one corner of the room, its doors slightly open, showing nothing but darkness inside. Martha noticed me looking at it and quickly said, "Oh, don't mind that old thing. It's been here since I moved in. Just never got around to getting rid of it." I settled in and went out for dinner, enjoying the small-town atmosphere. When I returned, the house was quiet. Martha had already gone to bed. I climbed the stairs, feeling an odd sense of heaviness. The closer I got to my room, as I opened the door, I noticed something strange. The wardrobe doors, which had been slightly open before, were now fully closed. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I just hadn't noticed earlier. That night, I lay in bed trying to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too quiet. I heard no sounds from the street, no creaks from the old house settling, nothing. Then, just as I was starting to sleep off, I heard a faint noise like a soft shuffling. I opened my eyes and listened. The sound was coming from the wardrobe. I sat up, staring at the large wooden doors. The shuffling stopped, replaced by a faint tapping sound. I held my breath, waiting, hoping it would stop. But the tapping continued, growing louder. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight toward the wardrobe. The light barely reached the dark corners of the room, but I could see the wardrobe doors shaking slightly, as if something inside was trying to get out. I told myself it was just my imagination, that maybe the old wood was expanding from the heat or something. But the tapping turned into a slow, deliberate knock, like someone was on the other side, demanding to be let out. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up, grabbed my stuff, and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in the living room, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound. The next morning, Martha found me and asked if everything was okay. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just said I wasn't feeling well and needed some fresh air. She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I decided to spend the day out, thinking maybe I was just tired and needed a break. I returned that evening, determined to tough it out. That night, as I got ready for bed, I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. On the small nightstand next to the bed was a photograph that hadn't been there before. It was an old, faded picture of a young woman standing in front of the very wardrobe that was now in my room. She had a sad, almost haunted look in her eyes. Written on the back in faint handwriting, "She never left." I stared at the wardrobe, its doors now slightly open again, revealing nothing but pitch black inside. My mind was racing. How had the photo gotten there? Who was the woman? And why did it feel like she was still here, watching me? I tried to ignore it and lay down, but every time I closed my eyes, I could feel someone standing over me, watching, waiting. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the wardrobe doors creaking open. I shot up in bed. The doors were now fully open, and from the darkness I could see a faint, shadowy figure slowly emerging. It moved with a strange, jerky motion, almost like it was struggling to stay upright. I reached for my phone, but in my panic, I knocked it off the nightstand. As I scrambled to grab it, the figure stepped closer, and I could feel the air grow colder. I managed to turn on the flashlight, shining it toward the figure, but there was nothing there, just an empty wardrobe. The room was deathly silent, but I could still feel the presence, like someone was standing right next to me. I grabbed my things and ran downstairs, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely unlock the front door. I left the house and drove to a nearby motel, too terrified to look back. The next day, I contacted Airbnb and explained everything. They said they would look into it, but I never heard anything more. The listing disappeared soon after, and Martha's contact information was no longer available. To this day, I don't know who the woman in the photograph was or why she never left that wardrobe. But one thing's for sure, I'll never stay in an old house alone again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these true, terrifying stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss scary stories that will keep you up at night.